It's Halloween on Today in Ohio. It's too bad a lot of cities didn't do their trick-or-treating Sunday night when the weather was nice because it's raining like hell today. It's the news podcast discussion from cleveland.com and The Plain Dealer. I'm Chris Quinn here with Lisa Garvin and Courtney Astolfi. Both Layla and Laura are off today. Laura might be back tomorrow. Layla's off for the whole week. Courtney will be here for the entirety. Let's get started. How much prison time did Christine Priola, the former Cleveland School's occupational therapist, get for her antics inside the Capitol with the mob that tried to overthrow our government on January 6th? Courtney, we talked about this last week. Now we know what she's going to be spending the next bit of time doing.
Yes, we learned Friday that Christine Priola, the 50-year-old from Willoughby, who was in the Capitol for 30 minutes on January 6th, she's going to be going to prison for 15 months, is what the judge told us. So I thought it was interesting to kind of hear the judge's reasoning for this decision. For the district court, Judge Tanya Chutkin in D.C., she said, this was nothing but an attempt to overthrow the government by people who were upset their guy lost. She said protesters at the riot were loyal to one man, not the country at large. And she pointed out in terms of the Priola sentencing, there's no mob here without members of the mob. So Priola, who'd already pleaded guilty to charges of obstruction and has agreed to pay $2,000 for her share of the damage, her lawyer had been asking the court to give her a sentence of less than 15 months. Her lawyer wanted the judge to, take into account that she didn't do any harm while inside the Capitol. The likelihood of her reoffending was pretty non-existent. Meantime, prosecutors wanted 18 months. And it was really interesting. So it sounded like they played some videos in the course of the court proceedings. And Priola was remarking on those when she was addressing the court. She, again said she really messed up. And for what it's worth, the judge said that Priola is one of the few defendants that's come before her involved in this riot that's acknowledged the harm that she did that day.
We talked about it last week. You felt a little bit of compassion for her because her life had turned to shambles and this group of loons gave her shelter. It was a group she could belong to. But they did try to overthrow the government. I was glad the judge said it. These people tried to overthrow the government because their guy lost and they couldn't accept it. That's exactly what happened. They were trying to overthrow the government, and anybody who says today something different is lying. It's just not true. They wanted to get in there and stop the transfer of power, and God knows what they would have done if they had captured some of the ranking legislators. So you can't not slam this. You have to send people to prison for this. This is about as high a crime as you committed against your country to try and overthrow it. You feel bad for her. I mean, she's lost everything. She's given up her career and, she looks like a crazy person now. But you do have to pay the price of misbehavior, which is kind of what the judge said, right?
Yeah, definitely. The judge zeroed in on that same thought. She pointed out that Priola was one of the relatively few folks who got into the sacrosanct U.S. Senate chamber. She got all the way into the Capitol. And the judge even said that Priola appeared to be enjoying herself while she was in there. So the judge points out, she told her, "I believe you are sincere in your regret, but I'm wondering if you'd be feeling this regret if you hadn't been charged with a crime."
Oh, I bet she would. If her letter is pretty sincere, I think she's looked back and thought, what was I thinking? Which is good. I mean, people should wake up from the mental illness of that day and realize it was what it was. It's Today in Ohio. The editorial board of cleveland.com and The Plain Dealer made a whole bunch of big endorsements over the weekend. Lisa, who did we like for governor, attorney general, auditor, and secretary of state?
Well, we liked incumbents. So let me just break it down by broad numbers. So in the big ones, Senate, governor, secretary of state, AG, auditor, treasurer, and then Supreme Court, 3 races there. We basically endorsed 4 Republicans, 5 Democrats, and that includes Tim Ryan, and 4 incumbents, plus Jennifer Brunner, who's currently sitting on the Ohio Supreme Court but wants to become Chief Justice. So for governor, we did choose Mike DeWine, the incumbent. The only, I think, outlier here really is Chelsea Clark, the Democrat in the Secretary of State's race. We endorsed her. It was a spirited debate when we were picking, but we endorsed Chelsea Clark.
Let me stop you on that one, though. Let's talk about that, because Frank LaRose was the only one of the incumbents over the weekend that we didn't endorse. And the reason was that he's been going around for the last 2 years trying to sow doubts about the election of Joe Biden, not in Ohio, but elsewhere. Every time he says Biden is the president, he follows it with a but. When you're the Secretary of State, the board said, you cannot be undermining the faith in the election system that you're supposed to be behind. And that was why we went with a less experienced politician in Chelsea Clark. What about auditor and attorney general?
Well, I did not sit in on the auditor endorsement race, one of the few interviews, and one of the few that I couldn't attend. But we did pick Keith Faber, the Republican there. Attorney General Dave Yost, I think that was another split vote too. I don't remember. There's been so many meetings, I forget. But I think that we, first of all, Jeff Crossman was very angry. He was an angry guy, and he immediately attacked, Dave Yost for, not curbing corruption in Ohio. But Dave Yost, I don't always agree with him, but he's done some good things. He really fought like a pit bull, to claw back money from House Bill 6. And, I think we looked at his overall record and said, okay, I think the scale tips more on the good side, so we're going to endorse him.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I thought that one was unanimous or close to unanimous. But the thinking was he does pander to far right Republican nonsense. He does participate in lawsuits in other states that have no interest in Ohio, but he has run that office pretty judiciously. That he's gone after people you should go after, and he's had investigations that are strong. And he said that at the end. He goes, "Look, I know, because I listen to the podcast on occasion, that you disagree with some of what I do, but I would hope you would endorse me while pointing out those disagreements." And he was right. He was the clear choice. With Faber, what was interesting about him, because I did participate in that one, he was positive we were not going to endorse him. It was kind of in our faces, calling out stuff I had said on this podcast, saying, you're not going to endorse me. You're going to endorse him. He's inexperienced. We're talking about Taylor Sappington. But in the end, there was no way the board could endorse Taylor Sappington. He has zero real experience almost that you could apply to this office, whereas Faber went into that office from the legislature where he had overseen state budgets, and he understands how government works. And to his credit, he has done nonpartisan auditing. He has not gone after Democrats, but not Republicans. We did slap him because he was on the redistricting commission that violated the law, although he makes a strong case for working in the background to get it done. And we really slapped him hard, and he tried to defend this, and he can't. When he thought no one was listening, about how it's possible Cuyahoga County is trying to rig elections in other states. I mean, we just jumped down his throat on that. And he tried to say, I never said that, but he did. He said it. He shouldn't say it. But overall, he gets a nod. With the DeWine Whaley, that was an interesting endorsement interview, and we've put the entire video online and broken it into pieces. DeWine kept sucking all the air out of the room. He probably talked 3 times more than Whaley did.
Right.
But in the end, we decided he's largely done a good job. He did a good job in the beginning of the pandemic. He's brought a lot of economic development. I was really impressed by Whaley's closing statement, which we've posted as a separate video. What did you think?
That was the only time she came out strong. It's like, why wasn't she talking like this for the last 6 months? I mean, she really, stated her case, and we saw a little bit of fire and anger that was absent on the campaign trail. I'm just sorry. But then again, this was the only time that the two of them have faced off together. And there were no debates. DeWine wouldn't agree to any debates. So I think, after that hour and a half, she kind of got warmed up, but it's maybe too little too late.
Yeah, her campaign has not been impressive, and if you can't run a strong campaign, how do you run the state? I do want to say, as we close this part of the discussion, for all the many people who write me and say we're in the bag for one party or the other, look at the ratio of the endorsements. That's utter nonsense. We do these endorsements based on who the best option is. It doesn't mean we say they're good candidates. We just are saying
Right.
they're the best option. Sometimes we have to hold our nose when doing so.
But I do want to say before we go that we endorsed all Democrats in the Ohio Supreme Court races. We
But
went
the
all
reason
down there.
But the reason for that is because the Republicans have shown a shameless adherence to party over people. Throughout the redistricting battle, the Republicans kept dissenting and really for the most specious of reasons. Plus, let's face it, Justice DeWine did not recuse himself from his father's case, which is completely inexcusable. And Sharon Kennedy, running for Chief Justice, keeps going out and talking about abortion when that's an issue that can come before her. That's completely inappropriate. And so that was a very strongly felt feeling by the board. Those Republicans are not doing a good job and they should not be reelected. It's Today in Ohio. Our team spent Saturday hanging out with J.D. Vance and Tim Ryan campaigns as they worked to line up voters in their battle for the U.S. Senate. Courtney, what did we hear from them and from the voters they spoke with?
Yeah, just a little more than a week out from this race coming to a close. And, J.D. Vance was out over the weekend with Mike DeWine and with Rob Portman, campaigning in Cincinnati and Wilmington and that part of the state. So, let's start with Vance here. The appearance with DeWine, it sounds like, was particularly interesting because his appearances with DeWine have been few and far between. Saturday marked the first time that Vance's campaign really touted that Mike DeWine would be there with him in advance. And we're seeing this turn from the primary when really the GOP candidates running in the Senate primary earlier this year weren't really on board with linking up with the governor. They were, kind of bashing him for his coronavirus policies at that point. But now we're in a different phase of the race. DeWine's numbers are looking strong, and our reporters found that it looks like Vance is looking to kind of ride DeWine's coattails a little bit here as his campaign is looking strong heading into election day. After this event, Vance told reporters that DeWine is going to win comfortably, and he noted that it was particularly good to have his support out there with him this weekend. And DeWine, for his part, he vouched for Vance. He said he'd known him for a long time, called him someone who's thoughtful, conservative, and going to be a strong voice for Ohio. And, when we're hearing from folks on the ground, we talked to Clinton County's auditor, Terry Habermel, and he really seemed to believe Republicans were going to be closing ranks around Vance, talking about this coming together of two different kind of wings of the party. The Clinton County auditor said, people in Ohio, they want somebody that's going to be conservative and make a difference, and he saw the support really coming in for Vance.
And we should note Donald Trump is coming in for a Vance rally a week from today to close out the campaign. Not here, Southern Ohio. Thank heavens, not here. So what do we see with Tim Ryan?
Yeah, let's talk about Ryan. So he was down in the southern part of the state as well. He was over, more Appalachia communities, Ironton, Portsmouth, Chillicothe, all places that have voted overwhelmingly for Republicans in recent years. But in the not too distant past, there were more and better chances to peel off Democratic voters. So we saw Ryan making a play for those voters. He went to, a little restaurant downtown Portsmouth, worked the room. It seemed like there were a lot of Democratic activists, including some who describe themselves as dwindling in numbers. They see themselves as a smaller breed down there as well. And, one nurse who came to the event told us that she didn't think Ryan had much of a hope in her neck of the woods. She said, quote, "The fact that he has Democrat next to his name, that's a mark in this county." But, we heard some people who felt better about Ryan's prospects down there, including Dale King, a veteran of the Iraq War. He came around to endorsing Ryan and agreed to appear in a campaign commercial for him, basically attacking Vance. And that veteran told us that Ryan's just one of us. He said he was born and raised in Portsmouth, but he said the more he's gotten to know Tim, he finds him to be a normal person, and he's casting his support for him.
Well, we'll find out how it all works out 1 week from tomorrow. It's Today in Ohio. I wrote this next one, so let me lay it out because I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts about changing standards of journalism. We received a request for a correction to a story that Plain Dealer printed in 1909. Not the normal kind of thing we normally get. Usually a correction request comes in within a few days or weeks. This was about the Veiled Lady of Kirtland, and in 1909, a reporter went out to this home outside Kirtland to create this pseudo mystery about a woman who'd been wearing a veil. And the story was later embellished and picked up. It ran again in 1940. It ran in 1970. It ran in the year 2000. It ran in newspapers around the world once it hit that the rumor was that she had been jilted at the author by her betrothed running off with her sister and wore a veil for the rest of her life. Not true. Not at all true. And the family had tried to get the record corrected, and now a descendant of the family, a historian at the Smithsonian, has found all the records that showed she had a lifetime eye problem, very painful eye problem, and wore the veil as a result of that. Since this story came out, it's been embellished. The Lake County Historical Society does ghost tours. So she's not just somebody that wore a veil. She was then a ghost in the window. And then by the end, in 2000, it was a bridal veil and the ghost was chasing men down the street. It's just the biggest whisper down the lane kind of thing I've ever seen. So when we got this correction request, I was going to assign it, but then I thought, this really does speak to the changing standards of journalism over time. People talk about the halcyon days of journalism. There aren't any. I mean, my feeling is that every journalist kind of writes to the standards of their age. So in 1909, they had a lot of entertainment in the Plain Dealer. The columnist, longtime columnist who wrote the column in the 1940, I get the impression she was an escape kind of thing. She did profiles on people and local folklore. She was esteemed journalist, won all sorts of prizes, including the Cleveland Arts Prize, even though I'd never heard of her, which says what we can all expect after we're long gone. So anyway, my conclusion at the end was I really can't judge what happened here because the different standards prevailed. Even in 2000, when I was at the Plain Dealer, I don't know how the reporter would have been able to refute this because none of the archives were digitized. The reporter wouldn't have known that in 1909 there was a story that cast doubt on the whole version because even in the original version, he said her best friends refute the romance idea. So I don't feel like we can judge. I got some emails from people that said, balderdash, they should have gotten it right. They should have gotten it right at every juncture. And this family has suffered for a century because of it. So I'm curious as to what you both think. Lisa?
Well, here's the thing. In 1909, I mean, what kind of archives did they have except for old papers? And there was really no way to verify the story other than talking to multiple sources who may or may not be telling the right story. So, I mean, this guy, and actually Paul Sturdivant, this Smithsonian historian who dug all this up, is a descendant of Harriet Martindale, the Veiled Lady of Kirtland. And, he asked us to correct the record. And I don't... correct me if I'm wrong, but you said that it wasn't digitized that far back. So you have to think about reporters in 1909. There's no television. There's radio is in its infancy, if at all. Not everything was electrified. So, you really had to count on people sources and maybe some old newspapers to verify your story.
But hold on, though. I mean, I ran half of his original story so people could read it for themselves. Because halfway through his story, he does a complete pivot and just quotes at length the novel at the time. But it's kind of creepy. I mean, he goes and he knocks on the door. And the woman, Hattie Martindale, comes to the door. And when she realizes what he's there for, she shuts the door. He keeps on knocking. And then, but he says in the story that the people who know her best refuted that romance rumor. So it's just why do the story? And as soon as he did it, over the next 2 years, it ran everywhere. New Zealand, Australia. The odd
Mhm.
thing was, and we can't find the source, in 1916, it caught fire again, ran in
Mhm.
hundreds of papers. I thought it might be in the Cleveland Press, so I looked in the microfilm because they're not digitized, but it wasn't them. I don't know who did it. And that's when the rumor that about the jilted bride goes nuts, and she was still
Mhm.
alive. And when
Mhm.
I talked to Paul, I said, do you think she suffered because of this? And he said, I hope not. She did seem to live, out her life in a pretty happy state. So maybe not. Maybe even unaware that this had gone around the world like that. But that 1909 article was not digitized until what, about 15 years ago, maybe 10 years
Mhm.
ago. So there's no way you could find it. I mean, you'd have to know it existed, right?
Mhm. Yeah,
Well, I mean,
go ahead.
go ahead.
No, no, go ahead.
I feel like the one chance they had to get this right was when the grandson of Hattie's sister wrote a letter to the plain dealer in 1959 saying, "This is made up nonsense. She has an eye condition. Will you please help me get this right?" And it doesn't appear anybody answered.
No, and that's a shame. So they had to wait like another 60 some odd years to finally get the correction. But as far as us proactively, because you were saying that maybe, we should go back through our archives and correct past sins. I don't know how proactive we could be about that. That sounds like a full-time job for somebody.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm leave that to the historians. Courtney.
I'm riveted by this story. First of all, I want to give out a shout out to that original reporter who did in an era of journalism that was very squishy and embellished. I like that he at least included that line. Like you said, the friend said this is not true. So I guess props that at least made it into his story. I think I think the way you're addressing it is a good way to acknowledge what went wrong without trying to purge and wipe out products of their time as they were printed back then. Like you can't hold 100-year-old stories to today's standards, but if you can do something like this to set the record straight, I think that's a nice way to address it.
Yeah, and before we close out, I should say I mentioned in the story that the plain dealer in the 1990s was a poor specimen of his newspaper, and I wish I had said, despite having a bunch of very good reporters and editors who were working at the time, there were excellent people working at the plain dealer in those years. The problem for the paper was the leadership was very poor, so ethical standards were low. Some very, very bad stories were published, and it was a shame for the quality people that were there that they were working for an organ that didn't have those standards. Then Doug Clifton became editor in 1999, and everything turned around. Most people agree with that, but I wish I had said the journalists that were there, a lot of them were high quality people, because they were. The plain dealer was doing some excellent stuff back then. It's Today in Ohio. What should we make of the timing of a donation that Cuyahoga County Executive candidate Lee Weingart made to an agency connected to former Cleveland Councilman Bashir Jones, who promptly endorsed Weingart after that donation? Courtney.
Yeah, so we got to understand the timing of what happened here, right? On June 30th, Lee Weingart's campaign committee paid 10 grand for quote services from Imani Wellness. It's a health and wellness company that Jones has supported and fundraised for. It's also an organization named in that FBI subpoena that was served on City Hall as part of what appears to be this probe into Bashir Jones. So Weingart made this $10,000 payment on June 30th. 7 days later, Bashir endorsed him for county executive. Now, this is something Weingart wholeheartedly 100% denies, but Ronane's campaign manager, David Razum, said the timing of these two events here, it smacks of a quid pro quo. Quote, if it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, I think we need to consider that it's a duck, Ronane's campaign manager told us. But Weingart said, oh, we'll pump the brakes. No way. Weingart says that Jones had asked him to help sponsor an event he was helping organize downtown, and we did it. And that's what Weingart explains the payment was for. He said the event was a showcase of 40 to 50 small minority-owned businesses, and that he saw it as an opportunity to pitch his ideas for investing in the urban core and supporting small businesses. So Weingart said at that time he didn't know Jones would be endorsing him, though they'd been discussing it for weeks. And then, a few days later, we got the endorsement.
Yeah, which then became very embarrassing because I think a day after the endorsement, it came out that the federal government, the Justice Department, is investigating Bashir Jones and a bunch of
Right.
other contracts, including the company, the agency that got the Weingart donation. Look, Lee was involved in marketing for a lot of his career. He understands optics, and for him to be shocked to find that he's being dragged through the mud on this, throwing the flag. Obviously, when the campaign finance reports came out, this was going to look bad. I mean, to give that money and then promptly get the endorsement, it looks bad. And it sets up Chris Ronayne's campaign to say exactly what it said. And I'm a little bit surprised Weingart didn't see this coming.
Yeah, and I mean, going back to Bashir Jones here, I mean, we don't know what's going to be the outcome of this FBI probe, but the fact that it's registered that this group that Weingart donated to, it was one of several companies and organizations named in that FBI subpoena from over the summer, as was its registered agent. So, two people involved with this organization are somehow of interest to the FBI here regarding other stuff going on with Jones, it seems.
Okay. You're listening to Today in Ohio. Lisa, do you think there'll ever be a point in our lifetimes where we're not talking about the coronavirus? Are we likely to see it surge as we head deeper into the fall and winter?
Yeah, it's not looking good at this point. And cleveland.com and the Plain Dealer talked to several experts about it. So Dr. Shanu Agarwal, who's the chief medical officer for Akron's Summa Health System, says this could be nasty, for COVID. He says they'll probably see a rise in children who will then bring it back home to their parents and other family members. He also said people have, for some reason, been delaying their bivalent booster shots, which is the one that should be helping with Omicron and some other variants. Dr. Amy Edwards with Rainbow Babies and Children's Hospital says she's expecting a surge very soon. She says because natural immunity to COVID doesn't last long. If you're not getting boosters, your immunity is probably very low. Dr. Kristen England, who's at the Cleveland Clinic, she's an infectious disease expert. She says she's not seeing a robust demand for these bivalent boosters. She says if those rates don't rise, that the deaths per day could hit 1,000 over this winter from COVID, and that's from a Commonwealth Fund study as well. So yeah, and in Ohio, only 900,000 Ohioans have got the updated bivalent booster. 125,000 of them are here in Cuyahoga County. 1 in 5 say they've never even heard of the latest booster.
Yeah, I don't get that because that latest booster has got me feeling, at least for now, pretty invincible. I was in a Costco over the weekend for the first time that I can remember. I wasn't wearing a mask. I know once it starts circulating again, we'll all mask up. But that new vaccine really does prevent you from getting sick. You can feel a little bit good about it until it wears off. So I'm surprised people aren't getting it, especially if they're right about the surge. It seems like coronavirus is always out in the atmosphere, ready to rain down upon us.
And don't forget the flu is going to be bad this year. They're predicting a very bad flu season this year and early onset.
And like you said last week, the shot this year is pretty good. So if you get it, you have good protection. It's Today in Ohio. How did the people behind last year's charter amendment to create a Cleveland Citizens Police Commission show their displeasure with what they call Mayor Justin's Bibb breaking of the law with his appointees? Courtney, you talked at length last week about how the nominees that he's come up with don't check all the boxes that are in the charter amendment, and Bibb and his law director believe they do. Without going deep again into that controversy, how did the people behind the amendment make clear that they're not happy about it?
Yeah, so without getting into the details of the language here that they're upset with, these folks, Citizens for a Safer Cleveland, they wrote and brought us this charter amendment last year. These are some of the key people why this is now part of the charter. They put it on the ballot, voters voted it in overwhelmingly, but four of these individuals, took to the steps of City Hall on Friday, and what was a pretty, I guess, dramatic press conference. Mayor Bibb had planned to stand on the steps of City Hall and introduce to the community these 13 nominees that he and city council have chosen for the commission who have yet to be formally seated. And the issue 24 folks were not having it. They carried signs, they wore t-shirts. They, after Bibb got into the swing of the press conference and introduced each of the nominees by name, these protesters started, blaring air horns and chanting at the mayor that the pics, the people standing on the steps of City Hall with him, were not the right makeup of the commission. That's not what they intended when they wrote the language. And, eventually Kareem Henton, who's with Black Lives Matter Cleveland as well, he stood in front of the mayor, blasted the air horn, and eventually the mayor just called it quits, shut the press conference down, and returned back inside City Hall.
Yeah, not a good optic there. I'm a little bit surprised that they're standing so firm instead of trying to talk to these folks. You don't want to kick this off in such an ugly fashion because it was a win for the city and a win for the Bibb administration, and now it's starting in controversy. The air horn shutting it down, though, that's kind of a new one. Must have been an interesting one to be present for.
Yeah, definitely. And after the conference we finally got a comment from the mayor about what he makes of this contention over who should be on the commission and who shouldn't be. And part of what his spokeswoman was explaining to me was that Mayor Bibb's reading of this language was the same as the last mayor's reading of this language. She says we arrived at this reading independently, and basically they're standing by how they're reading this charter language that the folks who wrote it themselves say is an incorrect interpretation.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, reading it, I'm not buying the Bibb administration's interpretation. There's a reason the words are in there, and I don't think that the what they're arguing makes a whole lot of sense. It'll be up to the courts to decide. It's Today in Ohio. That's it for Monday. Happy Halloween. Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Courtney. Thanks to everybody who listens.